Good afternoon and welcome to this webinar as we honor the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King on Martin Luther King Day. It is a pleasure for all of us to be here. We hope that this will be an occasion where we can lift up what Martin Luther King has meant to us and what his challenge is as we go forward. We have a very distinguished panel, and I'm not going to tell you all I know about them, because I think most of you know them. I'm simply going to tell you where they are and what they're doing now. And we're going to hear from two officials in government, and then we're going to have a panel discussion about what Martin Luther King means to us and what his challenge is going forward to build a beloved community. We welcome you. We look forward to your input. You can go to the chat box and leave questions, and we hope to have time at the end for some questions and answers. You can ask any of the panelists questions, or maybe even make a statement. I would just encourage you not to make long statements, because we want to give everybody a chance to be on, and that's coming from a preacher. So, by the way, I'm the Reverend Joe Harvard. I'm the pastor emeritus of First Presbyterian Church in downtown Durham, and I'm glad to be the host for this occasion. And I want to thank Spencer Bradford and DCIA for sponsoring this occasion, and also for Warren Herndon, and who heads the Martin Luther King Committee, for all those who participated in making this possible. As you know, we usually have a march and a big community-wide service, but that was impossible under the circumstances this year. So thank goodness for Zoom. And believe me, folks, we believe that this is a day the Lord has made. Let's rejoice and be glad in it. I want to first invite Representative David Price to bring us some words from his perspective as he represents us in Washington. David?
Well, thank you, Joe, and hello to everyone. It's good to see many friends on this call and to once again participate in this noontime service in Durham. It's for a long time been my favorite Martin Luther King observance in the Triangle, and you've been kind enough to invite me to bring greetings for many, many years now. So I have quite a file. Of speeches, and they often deal with critical events that were occurring at the time we observed Martin Luther King's birthday. Never before, however, never has there been anything that matches this year's Martin Luther King observance. Never have we seen the list as long or as daunting as the challenges we face today. The physical circumstances of our meeting reminds us, if we needed a reminder, that of course we're in the midst of a roaring pandemic, a rampaging pandemic, which has killed more than 400,000 of our fellow Americans and has ravaged our communities, particularly communities of color, exposing and exacerbating gross inequities in economic resilience, in healthcare. We've been cursed to deal with this pandemic with a president who has grossly misrepresented it and mismanaged it, and has made it far worse by politicizing it so that it becomes a political statement to endanger our fellow citizens by refusing something as basic as wearing a mask. Who would have thought that we would be at this point? The public health crisis has brought with it an economic crisis, with thousands of small businesses closing, millions losing their jobs, unable to pay the rent, unable to keep food on the table. And we're also facing a racial reckoning, precipitated by the police killings of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd and so many more, underscoring how far we are from realizing the vision Martin Luther King articulated of a community where all can live in dignity and prosperity and peace. And now to all these challenges, which require our democracy to be at full strength, we have a threat to that democracy itself. the most serious breakdown in our democracy, in our political system, in at least a century. Our capital has been overrun by a violent insurrectionary mob, something that did not occur even at the height of the Civil War. They've been fed a big lie by the defeated president, alleging a fraudulent election, and they sought to forcibly keep him in power. Far too many elected officials were willing to embrace the big lie. And in the case of 139 members of the House of Representatives, that's a number I'm still processing, actually vote to overturn legitimate election results. Then the mob came, incited by the president, brandishing the Confederate battle flag and other symbols of white nationalism and hate. And it took hours to secure the Capitol and to conclude the constitutionally required count of the electoral vote. We knew it was important to reconvene, and we did so, but the experience has left us profoundly shaken. We moved quickly to impeach the president, and we await the inauguration now of a new president, of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, in a capital that is fortified as never before in our history. And now, in the midst of all this, we pause for Martin Luther King Day. There's never been a King observance like this one, it's quite safe to say, in the 35 years we have gathered. I think it's also safe to say we've never needed the King observance as much as we do today. Where do we go from here? Chaos or community? King asked in a book published a year before his assassination. Question that's never been more pertinent than it is today. Now, part of the answer, I do hope and believe, is a political new beginning. Something I want to work on diligently. It will enable us to create the circumstances whereby we crush this virus, where we extend desperately needed economic relief, we build back better, as we say, and we put our fractured nation back together. That's the hope of the inauguration that will occur on Wednesday. But such a renewal is going to require a rededication on the part of all of us, a rededication to the ideals and aspiration that Dr. King articulated at another troubled time. Light conquering darkness, love conquering hate, a commitment to tell the truth, to each other and to the American people, a generosity and inclusiveness of spirit, a rededication to those common ideals, liberty and justice for all, and the beloved community of which Dr. King spoke. So may this day be the prelude. May this day lay the foundations, the moral and spiritual foundations for the work we must do together to redeem our land. Thank you.
Joe, you're muted.
Joe, I
Thank
believe
you,
you're
David.
muted.
Thank you, David, and we appreciate that very much, Representative Price. And now we will hear from our Honorable Mayor, Mayor Steve Schewel. Steve?
Thank you, Joe. And it's great to be here with everybody. It's great to see Representative Price. It's great to see Representative Price safe and sound after the attack on the Capitol. We are grateful for that. When I was a young parent, I used to bring my children to the Martin Luther King Day March every year. And I have marched in this march, as you all have, many years, ending up at First Presbyterian, where we have always had such a fabulous day together. And as Representative Price said, it's really hard not to be together today in that amazing gathering that we have all enjoyed so much. But we're here online, and we're going to make the best of it, as we have throughout the pandemic. And I'm just so glad to be here with everybody. I want to thank Dr. Warren Herndon. I want to thank Spencer Bradford, the Durham Congregations in Action, for helping us have this again today in this unique way. It's really great. And also Vivian Cruz O'Doherty, who's here from the city of Durham. The rest of us are celebrating Martin Luther King Day, and Vivian is with us working today. And I appreciate it, Vivian, very much, to help us record this so that it can be streamed later on the Durham City channels. This has been a tough year. There's just no doubt about it. And that difficulty continues, as David has described. But we are a resilient community, and we are going to get through this, and we're going to get through it together, and we're going to get through it to the other side. And we're going to be able to give each other hugs. We're going to be able to do the work together that we like to do in person. And next year, we'll be gathering at Martin Luther King Day together in person. It's going to happen. We are going to get through to the other side. And the Durham community is, we are going to be together again in all the ways that we love. This has been a really hard year, not just because of COVID, but as also, as Representative Price said, for other reasons as well. In Durham, we have suffered in so many other ways. After the racist murder of George Floyd, there was a righteous uprising in Durham and all across this country. And we have to keep that spirit alive, that spirit of change, that spirit of reform, that spirit of fighting racism wherever it raises its head. And that includes the work that we need to do here in Durham: police reform, affordable housing, making sure that our children who are home now being schooled have equity of access to all the online resources they need to be in school. And then after we come back, that equity continues. It's crucial. It's got to be at the top of our list all the time. I never had the chance to march with Dr. King, but I marched with many of his lieutenants. I've marched with C.T. Vivian. I marched with Joseph Lowery and Andy Young. And I've also been to the Capitol many times for marches. I've been to Washington many times. And I was there in 1969 in November. There were 1 million people on the Mall. It was an anti-war march. I've been to civil rights marches there. Never, ever would any of us ever have dreamed of attacking the Capitol of the United States. We were there in large numbers and making a powerful statement, but never would we have resorted to the terrible violence that we saw just a few days ago. And we know that in Durham, we reject that violence. We reject the white supremacy that has come along with it, that has created it. We reject the racism that was so present and so terrible in that awful, awful day. And we know that what it meant is not that this is over, but that we have a lot of work to do in our country and in our city, and that this work has to continue. And that what we saw is really a call to action for all the rest of us, to be peaceful, but also to be strong in opposition to what we saw that day. Every day, we all have to be working here in Durham to try to create the beloved community that Dr. King talked about. And I pledge myself to that, and I know that the rest of you all do too. So thank you so much for having me here on this Martin Luther King Day. I'm going to have to leave a little bit early today because I'm going to a service project, a socially distanced service project, a little before 1. But I am so grateful to be here with you all. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Mayor Schewel. We really appreciate your remarks. And in the spirit that that these two gentlemen have offered us, I think I like the idea that David Price said that this would be a prelude to a new effort to rebuild the beloved community. The beloved community has been broken, folks. I think that's what we've heard, and we need to try to work to build it up again. We gather because we stand on the shoulders of not only Dr. Martin Luther King, but many others who have fought and shed their blood, sweat, and tears to bring us to a better place. Names like Rosa Parks, John Lewis, Harriet Tubman, John Hope Franklin, Mary Ann Black. That's to name some of those folks upon whose shoulders we stand. So what we want to do is to reflect on how this legacy has affected us and how it empowers us to move forward into the new day that we face. And I'm very honored to have a distinguished group of people working with me. And the first person to talk to us is the Reverend Donna Banks. She's the pastor of the McMannen United Methodist Church. And Donna, we welcome you to this panel.
Thank you. Reverend Harvard asked us to reflect on what Martin Luther King memory meant to us. And I can honestly say growing up, what I remember about Martin Luther King Day was the annual speeches, the annual marches, and once I moved to the Triangle, the annual breakfast. But it really didn't hit home for me until we started celebrating Dr. Martin Luther King as a day of service. The quote that we use for that is, everybody can be great because everybody can serve. And after graduating from Duke Divinity School and going to my first appointment, we had an annual Martin Luther King Day of Service. And it was an opportunity for us to put together goodie bags for those soldiers who were in far off lands. It's an opportunity to write letters to them. It was an opportunity for us to make blankets for children who may have been displaced. But recently, what it has meant to me, and I tell you a story, was when we did something different at my last appointment, which was in Cary. When I first got to that appointment, I was asked by my Social Justice Committee if we could do Racial Taboo. Racial Taboo is a documentary about an Anglo man who documents his travels as trying to understand racism. He, for some reason, did not have any idea, so he chronicles this in this documentary. But in order to get the rights to Racial Taboo, you had to be in community with someone that was different from you, particularly racial. So when I got there, they said, would you happen to know someone that we could partner with in order to do this event? And I said, yeah, I know someone. So I called another pastor of a church in the area. I knew him because his kids and my kids went to school together. And I asked him, I said, would you partner with us in this Racial Taboo? And he said, no. He says, we are tired. I'll give you 2 sessions. And I was like, but you know me. Why not? He says, we're tired of trying to educate white people. So I had been befriended since I started there by an African-American woman. And she says, Donna, I might be able to help you out. And so we got our groups together. I got the group together, our social justice group, and I got her group together. Because my call to ministry has been to be in congregations that don't look like me. We came together and we sat down for our first meeting, and they said the same thing. We are tired of educating white people. And they said, we want more. We want a relationship. So they did not plan an event. They did not plan a program. They planned an opportunity for people to come together in order to be in relationship. They came together for a whole year in relationship, each month getting together to eat together, read a book together, to have discussion together, in order to be authentic in their work of anti-racism. So I offer to us 4 R's when we think about what this work entails. Because I think we have somehow forgotten that this is diligent work. It has to be undertaken every day and not just on Martin Luther King birthday or celebration of the holiday. Because the first R is relationship, just like realtors go location, location, location. It's about relationship. Relationship where we can learn to trust each other. Relationship that takes us beyond what we know about each other to knowing each other in our hearts. The second R is respect. I call that respect because I'm tired of people asking me to be kind. And I'm trying not to get that angry Black woman look on my face. Because kind says, I've got to make you feel good so that you can hear me. But I think respect says something else. Respect says, I respect you that you're upset. I respect you that you're angry. I hear you and I see you. The third R is repentance. That's something us Christian folks always talk about, is repentance. Metanoia. It means going the opposite direction. And I think that's what we have to do when we think about the work that we're involved in. It requires us to make a 180-degree turnaround from where we are now, going in the opposite direction. And then finally, the fourth R is reconciliation. Reconciliation only comes out of a result of transformation. It requires us to be ever-minded and diligent to the work of transformation. And I leave you with a quote. As we go through this work together, I believe that this quote from Martin Luther King says what I need to say in a nutshell. An individual has not started living until he can rise above the narrow confines of his individualistic concerns to the broader concerns of humanity. That's our call. And that's what Martin Luther King has meant to me. Thank you.
Thank you, Reverend Donna Banks. The powerful words. Thank you very much. And a challenge, a real challenge to us, and for which we need and for which we're grateful. Our next panelist is the Reverend Katie Crowe, and Katie is the pastor of Trinity Avenue Presbyterian Church in downtown Durham. Katie, welcome to the panel. You're muted.
Party foul. Thank you. Thank you so much. And it is really a treat and a privilege to be in such good company. And it's a gift to be able to gather with you all today. I love the question of what MLK Day means and have never been asked it before. So thank you, Joe, for the delicious question. There's 10 federal holidays, of course. 3 of those days commemorate the birth of consequential men, George Washington, Martin Luther King, and Jesus. 2 in particular are of consequence in the narrative of our country's civic unfolding. And one of those men has a historic witness that speaks into the fierce urgency of now like no other. And of course, that's the witness of Dr. King. All holidays, obviously, federal or otherwise, call halt to business as usual, knowing as we do that time rolls on and our distraction with it, without the exertion of intentionality to focus on events and people that need to be seen and remembered. There's a particular alchemy to the moment that presses us to not only refocus our attention, but to recalibrate our thinking on account of what and who we see when we give pause. Well, the celebration of Dr. King's birth was signed into law on November 2nd, 1983, the culmination of an organizing and advocacy effort, as we know, that was every bit as persistent as the man that the movement sought to recognize as being a person of national consequence, whose name needs to be inscribed indelibly on our national consciousness through legislation. I was 7 years old at the time of the first official celebration of the day that took place in January of 1986. I saw Dr. King's pictures in school, heard the story of his life, contemplated photographs from the movement, like the one that appears on the cover of the Herald Sun today, and watched year after year, video after video in social studies class of the civil rights movement. I wrote essays. I participated in service projects organized by schools in the 90s under the theme that branded the day in that decade: remember, celebrate, act, a day on, not a day off, which I love. Later, I attended community events like this one, organized special services among diverse planning teams, and was involved in community organizing, compelled by Dr. King's witness. And yet, it was not until I was just a few years younger than Dr. King when he was assassinated that I learned that Rosa Parks was part of an intentional effort to organize people, money, and power to make a decisive ideological strike for justice when the social iron was hot, and not just a woman too tired after a long day's work to walk to the back of the bus. So like the Apostle Paul in the Christian tradition, who walked around blind for 3 days after seeing Jesus on the road to Damascus while his world was totally reordered, I had to walk around blind for a few days while my world was reordered around the truth that I had studied and known at some level, preached and taught about, and yet still failed to fully understand. The truth that my education was so whitewashed that it didn't even occur to me to ask a whole different set of questions. A set of questions of myself and of systems and institutions that didn't start from the premise of, oh, the world is broken and therefore evolves with various manifestations of that brokenness, racism among them that need to be healed. But a set of questions of myself and systems and institutions that started with the premise that all of this, is intentional. The game has always been rigged, engineered by those who want to keep it rigged, and it is still rigged today. The condition of human brokenness is a problem. Intentional acts of sins of commission and omission and silence are the problem. And Christianity has been an incredibly efficient carrier for the distribution of whitewashed lies and contortions of reality in the very name of the one who is the embodiment of liberation and truth. So MLK Day means a lot of different things depending on where you stand in relation to it. But in a whitewashed worldview, the song celebrating Dr. King's life will lull the white mind in particular into thinking that singing them is enough. Unless we hear them as a battle cry and see this day for what it is. The proclamation that we must call a halt to the killing machine of business as usual and make decisive ideological strikes for justice that bear material consequence in our country and our individual worlds and our individual lives. So I'm so grateful to be about the work of this time and place on this day and in all the days that stretch out before us together. Thanks for the question, Joe.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Katie. Our next panel member is no stranger to us either, the Reverend Michael Page, who's the pastor of Antioch Baptist Church and also the director of external affairs at North Carolina Central University. Michael, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Joe, and thank you all for this opportunity to come and be able to share today. This panel and discussion so far has just really truly enriched me and makes this day so meaningful. I'm grateful to DCIA for hosting it. I'm particularly grateful for the comments from our leaders, elected leaders, Congressman Price and Mayor Schewel. They are very much on target to help our community to stay focused where we need to be and why it's so important for us to focus on this day. So I'm grateful for them pouring out from their heart and really sharing with us exactly as leaders how we need to continue to move forward. I'm so reminded today, and I heard it this morning on the radio, and Katie alluded to it, but it's a day on, not a day off. And why is it a day on? Because of so much that has transpired. 53 years ago, I heard my mother, I always tell the story, I heard my mother, she was standing in the yard of her friend's house. We were sitting in the car, and I live in a rural area, so you can imagine, just to give you a picture. But 53 years ago, I heard her scream like I've never heard her scream before. It was in the evening, and they were probably having female talk, but it just all of a sudden, just this loud scream came out. And we didn't understand, and I was a kid, we really didn't understand what was going on. And I had never heard of Martin Luther King. I never heard of him. But from that day forward, I became acquainted with who Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King was, because it was just like losing a family member because of her emotions. And she even took the day off on the day of his funeral to watch his service. I remember seeing Coretta Scott King sitting on that pew in mourning, and I just remember a nation just coming around this whole series of events to help me to understand that this is so important. Don't you lose sight of this day. And I haven't. I really haven't. The question's been asked for us today. What does this mean to you? And I kind of captured on Donna. Donna, I must have cheated off our notes because I came up with ours as well. But my R's are a little different than hers. Mine's was this is a day to reflect. It is certainly a day to reflect and to really think about this country, and particularly think about what has transpired over the last decades, but really the last year. I too, whoever made the statement, I am so grateful that our congressman is safe. We do not realize how our elected officials could have been destroyed on that day. We do not realize or recognize that. And when I saw them racing in that chamber, my heart just went in so many places. And so I'm really grateful to see him on this today, on this screen, as well as our other elected officials, because it could have not been the case. But we're here to reflect, we're here to remember. We're also here to revive our souls today. We need a source of rejuvenation. And I hope this hour today, and the remainder of the activities throughout the triangle, will help us rejuvenate our minds and our souls. And particularly, as the last question, I'll focus more on the rejuvenation. But let's talk a little bit about the reflection. The reflection is that we're talking about a real, true humanitarian, a true humanitarian. We've all been called to be humanitarians. This man was an example of a true humanitarian. His heart was there. He was a community servant. He was a helper. He was so much to so many, recognized by so many, really recognized by the hopeless, by the helpless, as a source to be able to help them gain the freedom and the kinds of joys that they deserve and should. I'm told, and I saw the picture of the night that he was here at White Rock Baptist Church. I saw the picture. Can you imagine? The room was full. How many people went to that right here, our neighbors, people we've known over these years, to really be able to become empowered and to be changed. simply because of one voice. So why do we need to really remember that voice? Because that voice had meaning, that voice had a lot of caring and compassion, and that voice was really about change. As we continue to remember, we must help restore the dream. And the theme for our citywide celebration this year is unfinished business, eliminating racism and advancing equity. I cannot think of any more area that we need to be focused on than this unfinished business. And in order to restore the dream, we have to continue to finish the unfinished business. And our elected officials who are present are helping us to really shape and craft an agenda that will help complete this unfinished business. We must restore the dream. The dream is a real dream. The dream is a dream that so many of our young people will witness on Wednesday. Young ladies are going to be just excited on Wednesday by what they're seeing. I'm excited about Wednesday because of what I'm seeing, because there's really, it's time for change in our community. And I know this, God has sent a man at a time such as this. So we're excited, but again, to remember that. We must continue as we remember, we got to teach the history. Katie and Donna have sensitized us to the history in so many ways today. They made it personal. And that's what I like about it, because it helps us to really go out now and teach this history to our children, that there really are caring people. There really are people who want to affect change. Donna almost made me cry when she said, I'm tired. I don't want to talk about this anymore. I'm tired of educating, she said, white people. I'm just tired of educating people. Because really and truly, you need to take time and find out who this source is and why this source is such a major person in our life. I really do get frustrated by the discussion sometimes, but I still believe there's going to be a light, or there is a light at the end of the tunnel, and that we really will get to that place. And some people really are entitled to discussions. But if we're not going to do anything about it, I'm like Donna, I'm real tired. This weekend also helped me to reflect on the divisiveness in our country. I must say that I'm amazed at how we still have so much hatred in this nation and in this world. We've been through so much. Right here in North Carolina, the election results. Nobody's saying this, but I'm saying it. How do you elect a Democratic governor? And all these other key individuals were not elected. Sherrod Beasley deserves to be in office. I'll say it. Yvonne Holley deserves to be in office. I will certainly say it. Reuben Young deserves to be in office, but they were not elected, and I want to know why. We all know the answer why. We have so much racism and hatred in our country that we are not really talking the talk like we walk the walk. As I continue to remember the day, I remember that there's a voiceless person out there. There's a person who needs to be heard. When I ride up and down Federal Street, Dillard Street, Queen Street, I ride up to help me remember why I'm still the pastor of Antioch Baptist Church. That's the reason why I ride up them. There's nothing else fascinating to see, but the people that are standing on those corners make me realize the dream has not been complete, and there is still unfinished business. And until we eradicate homelessness in this community, none of us should sleep at night. None of us. I also feel like this weekend helps me to redefine the mission and really redirect the mission. Building a successful community. How do we really help people get out of bondage that so many people feel trapped in? Folks, it's real. People are still in bondage. They are feeling trapped. They have no hope. They have no sense of, can I really survive through this? But I believe in my heart of heart that we can make this change. We also, this is a time this weekend, I alluded to this, we must empower the voter. We are still lacking. Look at the results. We are still lacking. We are not voting. We must empower the voter. And then finally, the recent riots and how the King movement was no way compared to January 6, 2021. No way. What does that mean for us as a country? That behavior that was exhibited was far from peaceful. Do you know what it's like to be in a silent protest? It's a wonderful experience because you are sending a message that everybody must embrace. King stood for a peaceful time. And then finally, until we can really get $15 as a decent wage for every individual, then I can sleep at night. Then I can rest content. Then I can believe we're doing what is right. But until then, we have unfinished business. Thank you so much. And I look forward to continuing this discussion.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you very much for those words. We do have great challenges before us, there's no question. And I think the events of this last year, even maybe the last 4 years, has pulled back the curtain and shown us that the dream is still unfinished, and it still needs to be rejuvenated. I mean, it seems to me like we need to have a revival of that spirit that Dr. King gave to us. All right, I'm gonna give folks a chance to talk to each other on the panel. If you want to say anything back to some other panel member, or if David, if you or Steve have anything you'd like to say, and then we're going to turn it over to our participants. So who has a question or comment? Don't be bashful. Well, I'd like to say, okay, I'm not going to be bashful. I was, like Michael, I was moved by Donna's story about trying to have conversation. And I think one of the real temptations now is for all of us to be tired. And African Americans have a much better reason to be tired than we do. But this is not the time for us to back away from working on building relationships and coalitions that will work. And for one of the greatest things about Durham Congregations in Action, and it does a lot of great things, but if it didn't do anything else, it has in its affirmation that behind every human face is the face of God. You see, and to value the dignity and worth of every human being and to work to see that carried out is a real challenge to us today, because the president, Theodore Roosevelt called the presidency a bully pulpit, but what we have is had a bully in the pulpit, and that's been contagious, and we've got to put that out.
Joe,
All right.
Joe, can I tell you I need to tell you the result of that conversation. Yeah. What happened was we decided to have racial taboo. We had the viewing of the documentary. The producer came, he brought people with him. We had discussion. We had 250 people show up. Let's take it a little bit further. Guess when we had the event? Martin Luther King weekend, 2017.
Wow.
Which would have meant what? The election would have been November 2016. There are people that want to do, but the thing about it is we kind of have lost being diligent in the work that we are called to do in building the beloved community. We've stopped being diligent. We've stopped caring. And we've moved because we thought we'd arrived, but this is the ongoing work because racism reinvents itself. What we know is that this has not been a virus of just COVID, it's been a virus of racism and a virus of white supremacy. And that is what has fueled us. I believe now that we realize that out of this chaos, and that's what we know as people of God, it is out of chaos that God brings calm. It's out of this chaos that we find ourselves in that we will get through this. I read a sentence from Martin Luther King, and he said it like this: we still have a choice to make today. Nonviolent coexistence or violent annihilation. This may well be mankind's last chance to choose between chaos and community. That's where we are.
Now, I have a question for our panelists and wondered if I could ask it.
Sure, please.
So we know that there were several thousand violent extremists at the Capitol, but we also know there were 74 million people that voted for President Trump. How many people? And that those 74 million people aren't all violent extremists. And I wondered if our panelists could talk about any thoughts that you have about ways to bring them into some kind of discussion, into some kind of, different kind of community in this country. I know I'm not really talking about trying to reach out to these, to the far ends of this group. But 74 million people is almost half our country. And something is so broken when that many people are voting for President Trump against their own financial interests and against so much of their other interests. I wondered if you all had any reflections on that. I can't figure it out, so I'm hopeful that you might have some thoughts.
Anybody want to respond?
So Mayor Schewel, one of the things that was going to say about in our next question, and I just shared earlier, is that we got to get back to community. We got to get back to the place where we can talk and we can trust each other. These are not rocket scientist solutions. These are simple one-on-one tactics that need to come together and help us. And one of my comments in the next statement is learning how to trust each other. We don't trust each other. And we got to come back as a community. I'll just add that part for now. Otherwise, I'll give you all my points for the next segment.
Yeah, I think along those lines that I think of all the different motivations behind the hand that pulls the lever in the voting booth. And some of them more esoteric around government and some of them profoundly local in terms of the motivations of their hearts. And I'm with you, Reverend Page. I remember always Rabbi Daniel Graber of Bethel Synagogue, my friend, saying that the reason that the winged seraphs on the Ark of the Covenant are facing one another is because of the belief that God is enlivened in the space between two people. And I have to believe that that we stand on higher and deeper ground when we acknowledge that there is another party in our midst when two people come together that has a great deal at stake in rooting us in the core of our identity as God's children, each created in God's image, and that unleashes these expansive properties in the soft tissues of our hearts and in the hard tissues of our mind when we name pain, when we enter deeply into one another's stories, when we don't let one another or the issues off the hook, but hold on to one another and wrestle until we get the blessing, like Jacob getting his hip dislocated from the angel at the river Jabbok. Some blessings can only come through pain. And I think we're in a moment of pain where there's a great deal about our common humanity that has been dislocated. And there's a whole lot of wrestling going on, but I continue to lean into the hope that if we can continue to create spaces between two people where God is enlivened, and we hold on to that and point to it and build every single conversation and action from that premise that we're all coming along to something deeper and wider, and hopefully more representative of the kingdom.
I've been a part of a group for the last 15 months that's been having some conversation on how to do that, how to have conversations with people different from you. And the conversations usually come out of, where do we have common hurts? That has to be the place where we start to trust each other. I always point back to the best of enemies. The best of enemies, what did it say? Where does it hurt? Ruby Sales says this all the time. Where does it hurt? And that's a place of beginning some conversation about building that muscle of having difficult conversations and moving us to a new place in understanding, a new place in making mistakes. We don't allow each other to make any mistakes. And then being able to say, hey, I don't hold it against your heart. We want perfection, but we gotta go through a little bit of pain, as Katie was saying. It's gonna take us to go through giving up something, trying some new different things in order to find a new place where we can be community, as Reverend Page said.
Thank you, Donna. Joe, if I could for a minute, we've had a question from one of our attenders raised about where, well, implicitly, white people can go to begin recovery from anti-racism without putting a burden on Black folks to help and support them with that. And I think that certainly if your congregation is not engaged in that presently directly as a way to do it, we've also found in the community like the Racial Equity Institute and Organizing Against Racism as places where the personal work of addressing racism can be engaged and delved into with leadership, Black and white, that are committed to helping people walk a path of change.
Well, I think it's clear that this is not going to be achieved without intentionality. You have to want to make a difference, and as Donna's story indicated, you have to be willing to reach out and take some risks, and to try to rebuild what Michael talked about, the community that's lacking. It's so easy to sit in our own little bubble, whether that be our church or our neighborhood or whatever, and not engage in a civil way with people who are our neighbors. We have something, I think we have something in our faith that talks about us loving our neighbor as ourselves, and that's a pretty basic principle. And even if the neighbor happens to be a Trumpite, I don't think the statement said love all your neighbors except those who disagree with you. So trying to find that ground where we can stand together is really important. Anybody else want to comment? Michael, you look like you have a comment. You got to unmute yourself. Unmute.
Thank you, Joe. I want to say thank you to the person who wrote the question. It's a thoughtful question, and I appreciate it. I think you jump in the fray. I think you make yourself a part of what you think is a viable solution. I don't think you got to pick and choose. There's so much work that needs to be done. There's so many things going on. Where your heart is where you're going to be led to go. And you're going to do what's best for you and that community. And you will accomplish what you need to accomplish personally. Plus, you'll be adding to the agenda that people are working on. So I just say, jump in the fray. If you can tell when you're not welcome. I've been in situations where I've not been welcome before, and it's okay. I have so much to offer that I go somewhere else and give it. So don't consider yourself an outcast, but just jump in and be a part of the thing. Nobody in my community, we don't want to talk about race. I could kill us. I like talking about hands. Harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. I like talking about hands. Who really has the same heart that I have? Let's jump in this fray and let's get it done.
We've also had we've had a couple of other questions come up. Two of them have revolved around the question of truth and lies about, well, lots of things that in recent events that have generated more divisiveness and conflict. And the question, and part of the question seems to be, how do we move toward greater unity and justice and reconciliation without coming to terms with the truth from leaders, elected leaders who are still in power in the federal government, without truth with each other. Maybe Donna's, identification of the where does it hurt question is a place to start talking truthfully with each other, but that question is raised. How do we move toward more unity without coming to terms with more of a shared truth as well?
Well, let me just say that in my whole history in public life, I've never seen as much hinge on the truth as it does in this current crisis. That's why when I was speaking a minute ago, I talked about the big lie, and that's not just rhetoric. It was a big lie. And that the big lie term, I think, comes from George Orwell or some such source, but it's apt because and it goes back, I think, to Steve Schewel's question as well. There's nothing that will explain that huge vote, and certainly nothing that will explain people so thoroughly alienated from a political outcome and distrustful of it, that doesn't go back to what people believe to be the truth. And the manipulation of the truth, of course, by the president, who's a master at it, and just unprecedented in his use of untruths. But the media, I mean, this is a huge problem. But let me just say that when we talk about reconciliation, I don't think you can base reconciliation in this country that we need to achieve right now, the things we'd like to see. I don't think you can achieve it without some basis in truth, some understanding of a common truth. What I think we have to hear from the people who precipitated the events of the attempted insurrection. They may not want to repent. They may not want to say they were wrong in various ways, but I think there has to be an agreement on the truth of the election, and some kind of disavowal of this big lie. And I'm sorry, I don't see any way of moving forward if millions of our fellow citizens actually believe that their government is illegitimate, that the election has been stolen. I just keep coming back to that. And but that's I don't think we proceed on any other basis. And of course that's a way of saying that it's true. I think that one of the basic foundations of our life together has to be a shared understanding, first of all, of what the truth is, but also of our obligation to tell the truth to one another.
I think it also says something else. It's that we have been listening to several different sources, and we fail in the business I'm in, I should say, in the work that I do. We have allowed ourselves to be polarized in one camp or the other. And by polarizing ourselves, we cannot hear each other. We cannot come together. And so, what I have dedicated my time to doing is storytelling. You tell me your story, I tell you my story. What are the things that mean things to you? In order that we can begin to come to some common ground about what truth may be for me, and your truth may mean for you. Because we have failed in some way to allow truth to be, truth now has a variable. It depends on who's telling it. And we've allowed that to happen as we, when you think about, I'll tell you the total that always gets me. While there's 74 million people that voted for Trump, 56% of white women voted, up from 52% last election. I still have trouble with that. I'm still trying to understand, help me understand what happened that you thought this would be a good idea for me. We don't see things from others' perspective. We only see things from our own perspective. And that's the part that I think we are lacking in our understanding, is being able to walk in another person's shoes or to see what has happened to them, in order that we can move forward in saying, hey, how do we become the beloved community together? I'm not a big fan of saying anti-racist. I'm not a big fan of saying defund the police. But I am a big fan in saying, hey, how do we build going forward? What do we need to go forward? What do we need to do to reform the police, not necessarily defund the police? What do we need to do to make things better for all of us, all of humanity? I've been doing a series on Wonder Women of the Bible, and this Sunday I preached about Fannie Lou Hamer. Well, I preached about Deborah, but Fannie Lou Hamer came up in the conversation. And I listened to one of her tapes. And she said, we're not trying to take anything from anybody else. We're just trying to build everybody up. And when we build everybody up, everybody benefits. And I think we've lost that distinction, that when we help each other, as you were talking about, Reverend Page, the $15 an hour minimum wage, when we talk about universal health care, those things build everyone up. And I think we've got to move past about he said, she said, and say, how do we go from here? Where do we go for building everybody up in order that we all benefit?
Pastor Banks, I think that's exactly it, which is where it hits the ground, right? Day by day, moment by moment, in very tactical ways. There was this really stinging meme that went around after January 6th, and it was called Post-Insurrection Sermon Bingo. And it was a bingo card. And it had on it, I can screen share it because I have it here, I can show it to you. It has the things that you might hear from pulpits, and I have said in time all these things that kind of normalize, or at least acknowledge. It's like words that can be spoken when we're standing in places of tension, of having people with different political persuasions in our pews. And you'll notice, I pull it up to point. Look at the top left box, right? Quote from MLK. And the reality is that every weakness is overextension of strength. So the strength of leaning into the wisdom of Dr. King's words can become a weakness in the way that they are digested in the belly of the white supremacy beast, where we hear stinging critique, but we don't know or don't allow it to kind of move us to action. I'm really Convicted by Paul Farmer. I always think of public health hero Paul Farmer's quote when he says, the definition of the white liberal is the person who thinks they can change the world without changing themselves. And I hold that quote up next to Israel's king in 2 Samuel when he says, I shall not render to God that which costs me nothing. And so I do feel that kind of white people and institutions have to get very tactical and both define and live into costly sacrifice for the sake of building up beloved community. Define costly sacrifice, what that looks like for themselves, what it looks like for their institutions. You mentioned the fight for 15. How does what I take for granted as just the ordinary way of doing things, like we said, this killing machine of business as usual, how is it grinding God's people in its teeth? And so to ask different sets of questions about our history, like whose blood and sweat and tears are saturating the soil that our institutions are built on. Questions about our governance, and in the case of churches, how our worship and our programs, and outside of our churches, how our workplaces and schools, how are decisions being made? How do they prioritize white culture or priorities or processes and privilege that is being upheld by them? Questions about our money, like where did we get it? Where do you keep it? What are they doing with it? Who can have access to it? Seeing every transaction as a moral issue. These are just kind of a few examples. And so I think, one of the ways that we can get at this work is listening very carefully to not only where the pain is, but also looking really deep within to notice where our realities have been whitewashed, and to take intentional steps forward moment by moment every single day until there's change. Jesus says, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also, which is to say that the behavior sometimes has to precede the sentiment. And in this case, the tactical steps forward has to precede the culture change. It's like we're waiting for the culture to change and then it'll look different on the ground. Now we have to start making it look different on the ground. In every single sphere of life, in relentlessly personal, relentlessly local, relentlessly specific, and especially for white people, relentlessly costly ways in order to see that culture change happen and realized. But I do think, given that point of God's presence in our midst, that when we do it together, there is this like generative quality to the energy that's cultivated when we're about this together. We know that there's this generative quality because something greater than ourselves is enlivened in our midst with God's presence. We get to see some fruit born on the other side of those like authentic relationships and that authentic sacrifice. We get to be expanded by not just stepping into safe spaces, but into brave spaces where the blessing only comes when you're wrestling. And we get to delight in seeing, hopefully moment by moment and tactical issue by tactical issue in action, we get to see this deepening of who we are, like this greater manifestation of who we truly are, which is a community of people that are made in God's image, and that consists of individuals that are charged to be agents of our mutual liberation, fueled by this God who sets us free. And so I like the challenge to get tactical, and I am grateful for prophets and witnesses that raise up issues like the fight for 15 so that we could know what tactical looks like. And I'll put my email in the chat and would love to create space. We have a few standing spaces to come together, to talk together about it. And I'd love to be in a space with you to think about what it means for you in your community of faith or in your life to ask those questions that become breadcrumbs that follow you down a path that you never expected to be traveling, but that is a path that can lead to, I think, our mutual redemption.
Joe, I know that we're getting close to our closing time, and on behalf of DCIA, I just want to make a quick
all right, but wait a minute. Let's hang on for just a few more minutes, and we'll get to the announcements in a minute. I think it's important to pick up on the point that was just made, and that is that one of the things that's key here, and I think it's important for us to remember that Dr. Martin Luther King was killed in Memphis. He was supposed to be in Durham that day. He was killed in Memphis fighting for the garbage collectors. And one way to start building community is to focus on these economic issues. Folks, the chasm between the rich and the poor has never been greater. And until we start addressing those economic questions, our talk about building community with people who are not like us is going to sound kind of hollow. It seems to me that if you don't want to stand up for their rights, and that's a big challenge. And we have a city council that's come on taking a stand on a living wage. We need to make sure the communities that we live in, I live in a retirement community, that we honor that. And so, I mean, that's one way to start, it seems to me, is to focus in on where Dr. King started. You know, he was getting ready to lead a Poor People's March, which Reverend William Barber is now doing, and would invite us to be a part of that to help lift the economics. Dr. Warren Herndon says, until we address this economic issue, we're going to be still be in a lot of trouble. And so I think we need to lift that up. I want
to say one more thing. I promise I'll be quiet. But I want to say one more thing is that I think what has happened over the last year has revealed how broken our systems are. Our economic systems, our education systems, our criminal justice systems, all of our systems have been realized that they're broken. And I think that we say, hey, it is opportunity after opportunity, as Katie said, for us to be tactical in what we do in order to work towards, as Isaiah 43:19, building something new. I believe something new comes out of something that is chaotic and something that is that has been broken. And I think we have an opportunity to build something new. I think the other part of that also says that I think young people finally realize something in this election, is that their vote counts. Before, they did not believe that their vote counted. And now they believe that their vote counts. I think that is something that we can build off of going forward. Stacey Abrams did a marvelous job in Georgia. And so that's an opportunity that we can build off something. Martin Luther King said one thing, and I think this goes to, this is another quote that I found that I had never heard before. I have the audacity to believe that people everywhere can have 3 meals a day for their bodies, education and culture for their minds, and dignity, equality, and freedom for their spirits. I think that's something we can work with.
And if I may just speak, Reverend Harvard and Reverend Banks, just to piggyback, let me just say that there's a lot of technical things that happens, and that's where I was. But how do we move forward in unity? And I think Dr. King understood in a way that was almost prophetic. And I encourage us to look deep within our souls and within ourselves and find a way to love each other and find a way to find peace. And as I close, I think that if we can find a way to look within ourselves and to love our brothers and sisters, then we will find what Dr. King taught in his dream.
Thank you very much. I want to thank all the panel, and I think Spencer's kind of let me know that we're coming to the end of our time. Donna shared some wonderful quotes with us. There's a quote that I cannot get away from because it seems so true to me, and it's a quote made by Archbishop Oscar Romero. And Oscar Romero says, when we dream alone, it's only a dream. But when we dream together, it can be the beginning of a new reality. And I think to try to follow Martin Luther King's dream alone is lonely. So we need to build a community of those who are working together. Michael, you talked about this, and I really appreciate it.
Can I just please add this one last quote, and that's from Cornel West in Race Matters. He said, "None of us can save the nation or the world, but each of us can make a positive difference if we commit ourselves to it."
I hope what this panel has done is encouraging all of us to recommit ourselves, to rededicate ourselves, to try to build the beloved community where we are. And that, I think that's all any of us can do. And David Price, we're so glad you're doing that in Washington. You got a big job, buddy, but we're supporting you all the way. And Steve Schewel also. Steve had to leave. Thank you all very much. This has been very helpful, very insightful, and I really appreciate everyone. And Spencer, I turn it over to you or Warren. I don't know which one of you are going to close us out.
Thank you, Joe. Before Warren closes us with a benediction, I just want to express gratitude not only for the panelists here today, but also to acknowledge that our DCIA Board of Directors has made having some of these conversations to build beloved community and recover from racism a priority this year. Donna and Joe and others on our board are giving leadership this year for creating occasions for faith communities to address the problem of racism that divides our society and separates us in the community. And please stay tuned to DCIA's website and Facebook page and emails in the coming weeks to learn about those opportunities. And if you are interested in connecting your faith community with these conversations and dialogues, please reach out to DCIA at dcia.org. And we will keep you engaged and in the loop. That being said, let me turn this over to back to Reverend Warren Herndon to close us with a benediction.
My brothers and sisters, we pray and we thank God for this opportunity to spend time together, to share in love, share in respect, and share and find peace within our hearts and our mind. May we continue to be blessed until we meet again. It is in your Son Jesus' name that we do pray. Amen.
Amen.
All right, everybody, thank you again for coming. Thanks to Joe for moderating this this panel discussion. Reverend Harvard's been a valuable leader in making this happen today. For Reverend Herndon for helping to arrange and coordinate this, and to Representative Price, Reverend Page, Reverend Banks, Reverend Crowe and Mayor Schewel for being present here with us today. Let everyone get to their next events of service on Martin Luther King Day today. Thanks for coming out for this.